Possession is easily one of the most psychologically devastating, criminally misunderstood, and institutionally suppressed films in the entire history of European cinema. A work so raw and so uncontained that it broke its leading actress was banned by the British government and was surgically gutted for American audiences who were never permitted to see what it actually was. So, let's take a look behind the scenes of the movie with 13 dark things you didn't know about Possession, including the real actress who hesitated just long enough to accidentally hand one of cinema's greatest roles to someone else. The directing method rooted in voodoo ceremonies and experimental Polish theater that Żuławski used to push his cast beyond the boundaries of performance, and the story of the man behind the camera who had a deeply personal reason to be uncomfortable with every single thing he was photographing. Now, to understand Possession, you first have to understand the specific and simultaneous nature of what Andrzej Żuławski had lost in the years before he wrote it. By the late 1970s, Żuławski had already been censored, blacklisted, and effectively expelled from his own country once. His 1972 film The Devil, a visceral historical portrait of state-sanctioned barbarism, was banned immediately upon completion by the Polish communist authorities. He was permitted to return only after his international success, and when he came back, he spent 2 years making On the Silver Globe, an enormously ambitious science fiction epic based on the lunar trilogy written by his own great-uncle, Jerzy Żuławski. The Polish government shut the production down in 1977, after approximately 80% of it had already been filmed. According to multiple accounts, the authorities ordered that the materials be destroyed, sets dismantled, footage confiscated. Żuławski defected permanently to France. Simultaneously, his marriage to actress Małgorzata Braunik, who had starred in his first two films, who was the mother of his son Zachary, collapsed entirely. His country had taken his work, his wife had left. He sat down in France and wrote Possession. Every frame of the film is the document of a man trying to metabolize two irrecoverable losses at the same time. So Żuławski had his script and his setting. He did not yet have his Anna. The role was first offered through the standard channels of European co-production negotiation to Jude Davis, the Australian actress, who had just delivered a career-making performance in Gillian Armstrong's My Brilliant Career in 1979. Żuławski had seen the film, he was interested. Davis received the script, sat with it, and hesitated. She did not commit. That hesitation, that window of indecision, gave Isabelle Adjani time to read the screenplay and decide she wanted the role entirely. By the time Davis had made up her mind, Adjani had already agreed. Here is the connection that makes this casting story particularly strange. Sam Neill had also appeared in My Brilliant Career as Davis's love interest. Żuławski cast him as the male lead. So the central couple in Possession were both originally connected to a single Australian film, one as the star who passed on the role, and one as her co-star who ended up taking the other half of it. The film is full of doubles and doppelgangers as a narrative device. Its own casting history is structured the same way. Now here is a detail that most critical analyses of Possession either gloss over or omit entirely. The director of photography was Bruno Nuiten, one of the finest cinematographers working in French cinema at the time, and the man who would later shoot the luminous Jean de Florette and Manon des Sources for Claude Berry. Nuiten's visual intelligence is all over the film. But what almost never gets mentioned is that Nuiten was Isabelle Adjani's romantic partner at the time of filming. He was, in the most literal sense, the man behind the camera watching his own girlfriend being psychologically dismantled, scene by scene, by a director whose methods were, as we will get to, considerably beyond what most productions would permit. Multiple accounts confirm that it was Nuiten who talked Adjani into taking the role in the first place, which means he persuaded the woman he loved to enter the most punishing professional experience of her life, and then spent the entire shoot photographing the consequences of that decision. What that dynamic actually felt like on set, what it cost the relationship, is something the historical record has never quite addressed. So how exactly did Żuławski direct? Because the performances in Possession don't look like performances in any conventional sense. They look like something closer to possession in the religious sense, a total evacuation of the self and its replacement by something else entirely. The method Żuławski used had been developed over years and drawn from two distinct and unconventional sources. The first was Jerzy Grotowski, the legendary Polish experimental theater theorist whose poor theater movement stripped performance of all artifice and demanded that actors make themselves physically and psychologically available at a cellular level, beyond the reach of technique. Żuławski had deeply absorbed Grotowski's methodology. The second source was even more unusual. The BFI's production notes on Possession document that Żuławski made multiple visits to Haiti specifically to observe voodoo ceremonies, to study the mechanisms by which human beings surrender voluntary control of their bodies and behavior to an external force. He came back with techniques. On set, he allegedly put his cast, and particularly his actresses, whom he believed needed to be most thoroughly liberated from themselves, into states approaching trances before filming key scenes. This is not metaphor. He reportedly placed his performers into altered psychological states and then turned the camera on them. Whether that constitutes a directing method or an ethical violation is a question Possession's production history has never resolved. Now, the single most documented confrontation on the set of Possession is one that Neill has spoken about in interviews spanning decades, most recently in a 2023 piece for IndieWire. Żuławski instructed Neill to actually slap Adjani, not to mime the gesture, not to imply the contact, to hit her. Neill's response was categorical. I said, "Look, Andrzej, I have to say no, I can't do that. You can't ask me to do that. I have never raised a hand to another human being and I have to say no. Please don't ask me to. I'm not going to do it." What happened next is the part that haunts him. Adjani came to him herself. She told him he had to do it. She said she needed it. She was insistent. Neill eventually complied. He later described it as the most distressing thing I have ever had to do on film. He also said, of the director, he asks so much more of you than you could possibly give. He asked much more than a director should. Adjani, for her part, later described Żuławski as manipulative and abusive during production, and confirmed that this pattern was calculated, designed to push her toward the psychological states the film required. Neill escaped the production by his own account with his sanity barely intact. Adjani did not fare as well. But no analysis of Possession is complete without confronting the subway scene, the sequence that functions as the film's detonation point and has been discussed, dissected, and returned to by film critics and academics for over 4 decades. In it, Anna descends into a Berlin underground station and suffers what can only be described as a total physical and spiritual collapse, convulsing, screaming, hurling her groceries against the walls, her body moving in ways that seem simultaneously choreographed and completely involuntary in a sequence that builds for several uninterrupted minutes before resolving into something even more disturbing. The scene was shot in a real Berlin subway tunnel with Steadicam work by camera operator Andrzej Żuławski, whose fluid, circling movements give the sequence its relentless, documentary quality. According to multiple accounts, Adjani had no conventional script for this sequence. There was no action line reading Anna falls apart. What Żuławski gave her was a physical and psychological state, a set of internal conditions produced through his Grotowski-derived methodology, and then filmed the result. The scene was shot in a very small number of takes. It remains one of the most extraordinary pieces of screen acting ever committed to celluloid, and it cost its performer an amount that a frame rate and a running time cannot measure. Now, the choice of West Berlin as the setting for Possession was not logistical. It was thematic, architectural, and deeply deliberate. Żuławski chose the city specifically because in 1980 it was a place physically and ideologically divided against itself, a city with a wall running through its body, separating two systems, two realities, two irreconcilable versions of the same urban space. The Berlin Wall is literally visible from the window of Mark and Anna's apartment in the film. You can see it in the background of multiple scenes where figures with binoculars observe the action from the eastern side. Żuławski was building a visual metaphor into the film's geography. A marriage, like a divided city, can exist in a state of apparent normalcy while a catastrophic rupture runs directly through its center. What makes this richer is Żuławski's own biographical position. He was a Polish exile, a man whose own country had been divided and controlled by a system he had been expelled from, now making a film in a city that embodied that division architecturally with the wall visible from the set. The film was shot in the Kreuzberg district of West Berlin, the neighborhood that ran hardest against the boundary. Every time you see concrete in Possession, you are looking at a specific political and personal wound. So the creature, the tentacled, evolving entity that occupies Anna's secret apartment and becomes her lover and eventually her creation, was designed and built by Carlo Rambaldi. That name carries a specific and remarkable weight in the context of 1981. Rambaldi was the Italian special effects artist who had built the animatronic alien head for Ridley Scott's Alien in 1979, the design that redefined what cinema could make audiences believe was alive. He came to Possession, built the creature under significant time and budget constraints, resources that were, according to accounts, a fraction of what he had available on Alien or on his earlier work for Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. When the producers first saw the result, They reportedly said it looked like a giant condom. The producers were wrong. The creature works precisely because Rambaldi understood, apparently instinctively, that the film was not asking for a monster in any conventional sense. It was asking for an ideal, a perfect lover, growing toward human form through Anna's desire. Exactly 1 year after completing The Creature for Possession, Rambaldi gave Steven Spielberg E.T., The Extraterrestrial, 3 consecutive years, three of cinema history's most distinctive created beings. The darkest one, built under the most difficult conditions, for the least money, is the one most people have never seen. Now, when Isabelle Adjani won the Best Actress prize at the 34th Cannes Film Festival in 1981, it was reported in essentially every outlet as a triumph for her work in Possession. What almost nobody mentioned, and what is consistently omitted from the film's popular reputation, is that the Cannes jury awarded her the prize for 2 performances simultaneously. Adjani that year had also starred in James Ivory's Quartet, a measured, elegant Merchant Ivory adaptation of John Rhys's novel, in which she played a quietly devastated woman trapped in a ruinous romantic entanglement in 1920s Paris. The 2 performances could not be more different, one a sustained explosion of physical and psychological disintegration, the other a study in controlled interior suffering. The Cannes jury decided that taken together, the 2 performances constituted a singular achievement. Adjani did not win for Possession alone. She won for Possession and for the evidence, provided by Quartet, that what you were watching in the subway scene was craft deployed at an extreme, not the collapse of craft entirely. That context changes what the award means. It was the jury saying, she knows exactly what she is doing. The fact that it nearly destroyed her is a separate matter. But the most disturbing single piece of information attached to the making of Possession is one that Żuławski himself disclosed on the DVD commentary track in a tone that many listeners have found troublingly casual. Adjani had refused throughout the entire production to watch the dailies. She did not see any footage of her own performance until the finished film was screened. The DVD commentary records Żuławski explaining what happened after that screening. He confirmed that Adjani attempted suicide. She had seen herself for the first time in the completed film, and, confronted with the totality of what the production had extracted from her, she attempted to take her own life. Żuławski described the attempt in clinical detail. She cut her wrists with a G2 machine which cuts you half a millimeter of skin and not much deeper, a description whose minimizing tone struck many who heard it as revealing something about the director's relationship with the material he had produced at her expense. Adjani survived. She later told a French magazine that it took her several years to recover from the role, and that she would never take on anything similar. Possession, she said, is only the type of film you can do when you are young. She won the César Award, the French Academy Award, for the performance in 1982, the year after Cannes. The ceremony took place while she was still, by her own account, not fully recovered. So the film premiered at Cannes in May 1981, screened across Europe, was received in France as a work of uncompromising artistic seriousness, and was immediately placed on the United Kingdom's official video nasties list, the government blacklist assembled under the Video Recordings Act, which banned the film from retail sale entirely. It took until 2010 for Possession to be removed from that list and legally available in the United Kingdom without restriction. The American release is a separate and equally grim story. The distributor Limelight International Films acquired the film and removed 43 minutes from its running time, cutting it from 124 minutes to 81, reorganizing scenes in an attempt to impose narrative clarity on a work that was specifically and deliberately designed to resist it. The edit turned a psychodrama of devastating emotional precision into an incoherent horror item. It was released in the United States on October 28, 1983, dumped just before Halloween, the clearest possible signal that its American distributors had no idea what they had bought and no strategy for selling it honestly. The theatrical release was, reportedly, promoted in some venues with complimentary barf bags. The film grossed $1.1 million in the United States, a figure that tells you everything about how thoroughly an act of institutional vandalism can suppress a masterwork. Now, there is one final competitive detail from the 1981 Cannes Film Festival that almost nobody mentions when discussing Possession's premiere, but which carries a particular weight given the film's autobiographical origins. Possession was nominated for the Palme d'Or, the festival's highest prize, but did not win. The film that beat it was Man of Iron, directed by Andrzej Wajda. Wajda was not simply a fellow Polish filmmaker, he was Żuławski's former mentor. The man who had shaped his understanding of cinema defeated him at the most significant festival of Possession's release with a film about the Solidarity movement, a film about Polish political resistance, the exact political reality that had driven Żuławski into exile. Żuławski made a film about the private violence of a collapsing marriage. His mentor made a film about the public violence of a collapsing state. The jury gave the palme to the public wound. Żuławski's private one took the acting prize and a cultural notoriety that has outlasted most of its contemporaries. But the final dark fact about Possession is not about what the film did to its director or its leading actress. It is about what it did to its leading actor, and specifically, what it did not take from him. Sam Neill has described Possession, in multiple interviews across 40 years, as both the most extreme film he has ever made and his personal favorite from his entire career. He has called Żuławski a genius and a crazed man in the same sentence, repeatedly, without contradiction. He has said the director asked more than any director should. He escaped the film, as he himself put it, with his sanity barely intact. And he loves it more than any other thing he has made. That paradox that the work which came closest to breaking him is the work he is most attached to, is something Neill has never quite been able to explain, and has never stopped trying to. It may be the most honest thing any member of the cast has said about what Possession actually costs to make and what it gives back in return. There is a scene in the film where Mark, standing amid the wreckage of his marriage and his reason, says simply, "I don't understand anything anymore." Neill has described Żuławski's method as producing exactly that state in the actor: genuine incomprehension, genuine loss of footing. The performance is not an approximation of that feeling. It is the feeling. That is what the film is. And that is why nothing else has ever quite sounded like it. When the butchered American cut arrived in 1983, the critical response was broadly dismissive. Reviewers who encountered the 81-minute version encountered something genuinely incoherent, a film stripped of the emotional architecture that gave its horror sequences their meaning. Without the context, the subway scene was merely shocking. Without the build, Adjani's performance looked like hysteria without cause. The distributors had amputated the film's argument and sold its symptoms as the product. What critics were reviewing in 1983 was not Possession. It was the corpse of Possession, arranged to look like a genre film. But nowadays, Possession is widely viewed as one of the most significant works in the history of psychological horror, and the distance between that 1983 reception and the film's current standing is one of the largest credibility gaps in modern cinema criticism. The Criterion Collection has championed the film. Second Sight Films released a 4K restoration in a limited edition box set. The British Film Institute held a major retrospective. The Roger Ebert website's full-length retrospective review, published decades after the US release, describes it as genuinely extraordinary. Sam Neill considers it his finest work, and Isabelle Adjani's performance in the subway scene is now routinely cited alongside the most sustained pieces of screen acting in the medium's history. Alongside Falconetti in The Passion of Joan of Arc, alongside Gina Rowlands in A Woman Under the Influence. It took the world 30 years to catch up to what Cannes saw in 1981. Some films are too honest about the experience of being human to be welcomed immediately. Possession is one of them.